Now that we've talked about all the different things that we can eat, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and then those components that can help with this, like vitamins and minerals, let's talk about how our body can take those items and make energy from it. So basically, we have enzymes in our body that work to produce the overall effect known as cellular metabolism. So what are enzymes? What do they do? And so an enzyme is basically a protein. There are instances where they can be RNA, but they're very, very rare. They're mostly proteins that help to lower what's known as activation energy. Activation energy is the amount of energy to start a reaction. And what this can do, it can help to speed up chemical reactions. Now, cellular metabolism are all the chemical reactions in the body. And so they can be basically anabolic, or catabolic. And we're going to talk about what these are. Now, cellular metabolism, when we go through these, it has two main functions. It can provide energy for our body, and it also helps to make proteins. So anabolism, or anabolic processes, are when we build larger molecules from something that's small. And so since we're in the body, we're going to focus on building carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. So when we're talking about carbohydrates, what are they built from? What are the individual types of molecules that carbohydrates are built from? Monosaccharides are simple sugars, right? Lipids, which are fat, these are triglycerides, right? This is fat or a lipid. They're built from glycerol and fatty acids. And proteins, it's monomer. This is basically their monomers, right? Their building units are made from amino acids. If you've taken my class before, this is all review. We've gone over all of this. So what kind of reaction actually takes these small monomers and makes them into polymers, or a larger molecule made up of smaller molecules? It's dehydration. And so this is a synthesis reaction, right? That helps us to make or build macromolecules or polymers. So carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. And what they do is basically we have water leaving to allow two molecules to be together. Now, catabolism has to do with breaking down molecules into smaller. So most of the time when we're like, oh, my metabolism is awful, we're thinking about how fast our body processes food and breaks them down. But technically, metabolism is all the reactions in our body combined. And then catabolism is more specific that you're thinking about. is breaking those molecules down. And so when we're talking about carbohydrates are broken down from, so the largest carbohydrates that you might say are polysaccharides. Those are many, right? Or disaccharides. And so basically they're broke down from these larger entities into monosaccharides, right? And when we're talking about triglycerides, triglycerides are broken down. Basically, these are the energy unit. And so you might have large amounts of fat put together, and that's why bile is important, because it's going to emulsify fat. And then it's going to be able to take things like triglycerides and then break them down even further. And proteins, known as polypeptides, we can basically break large entities right down into amino acids. So carbohydrates, we're getting it, as you remember, from things like sugars, pastas, food, triglycerides, fats you might find in burgers or fatty meats. Proteins you'll get from meats and beans and things of that nature. So when you're talking about breaking things down, what reaction do we use to break them down? Maybe you remember hydrolysis, which is a decomposition reaction. The other one was a synthesis reaction. This is a decomposition, right? It takes really large molecules and breaks them down. And we need water to do this. So I think hydro as in water, break it down nice. And so, cellular metabolism includes hundreds and hundreds of different reactions. And they're all controlled by enzymes. So when we're talking about all those things, we mentioned two big words. We mentioned cofactors and coenzymes. And so cofactors are non-protein components. These are going to help the active site obtain appropriate shape. Sorry. So we've mentioned earlier, you can have ions like copper, iron, or zinc. All of these can be cofactors. No, coenzymes, these are just small molecules. And this as well is going to help with the shape of the active site, and just like before, help the binding enzymes to bind substrate. So basically you have some molecule right here, and then you're going to have an enzyme. And this molecule is going to fit inside here. And become an enzyme substrate complex, basically. And then that enzyme is going to do something to this. Maybe it ends up breaking it in half into two different molecules. And so these cofactors and coenzymes are going to go on here and attach to it. It's all a difference between, are they something like a mineral, or an ion like copper and iron or zinc, or are they a small molecule that helps to do this? Now, again, this all should be review. How does denaturation affect enzymes? And basically, denaturation is a process of breaking them down, right? They lose their shape. And so on here, there's different things that can cause it. A big example that you might see in our body is excess heat. And so 45 degrees Celsius is going to inactivate proteins, and greater than 55 is going to denature them, which means it's going to change their shape. So excess heat can do it. Radiation can do it. Thus radiation sickness, right? Electricity can do it. Certain chemicals can do it. Extreme pHs can do it. And poisons can do it. So if your enzymes aren't working right, you can't make important components in your body, and things such as structural components, but a big part of it, you can't also make energy. And so there's two main ways of making ATP. And it's either through cellular respiration or substrate level phosphorylation. So cellular respiration is a catabolic breakdown. So we're going to break things down, right? Where food that we eat is turned into ATP itself. And it's done that because we start with this molecule called adenosine diphosphate, and we make adenosine triphosphate from this process. And it's a lot of reactions. RxN is a shorthand for reactions. Now you can also make ATP by what's called substrate level phosphorylation, and that's just when you have something like ADP, and this other molecule will have this really high energy phosphate, and it just puts it straight onto it to make ATP. So these are the two main ways that we can make ATP in our body. And so, if you look at it here, cellular metabolism has a few different steps. The first step is glycolysis. The second major step is citric acid or Krebs cycle. And the third is oxidative phosphorylation. There is a step in here that's called the intermediate step that I always talk about as being an individual step, but most of the time they don't talk about it as being a step. So as you can see in here, depending on your food source, whether it's proteins, carbohydrates, or fat, it can provide a starting material in different stages of these particular parts of the cellular metabolism pathway. And so for proteins, basically certain amino acids are broken down. You remove the amine group here, and then they can fit into either glycolysis. They can be that intermediate starting product, or less frequently, they go into the citric acid cycle. If you have carbohydrates, it's going to be broken down into two things, right? Basically, Either you're going to go, actually, strike that. Carbohydrates can be used as glucose, and other sugars can be converted into the stored glycogen, but glucose itself can go straight into glycolysis, which is why they tell you to basically carb load, because this whole sequence is going to give you the most maximum amount of energy for the least amount of buck. And then fats can be broken down into two components, glycerol and fatty acids. Together they make triglycerides. Separate, glycerol can fit into glycolysis. Basically, when we talk about it, it's the area where you will see the ugly and hot stepsisters. Or it can feed straight into this intermediate, right? And then as you can see, the brunt of ATP gets made down here in oxidative phosphorylation. And this is where we'll make water, metabolic water, and it takes oxygen to do so. And one of the big waste molecules out of here, of course, is carbon dioxide, and we'll talk about that.
Glycolysis can occur without the presence of oxygen and takes place in the cytosol, or the fluid found in the cytoplasm of cells. In we humans, glycolysis often provides the energy for events such as 100-meter dashes and weightlifting that require short bursts of energy. These types of activities depend on glycolysis because they happen so suddenly that the cells of the body cannot be oxygenated rapidly enough by the heart and lungs to support the second means of converting glucose into energy, cellular respiration, which requires oxygen. Glycolysis is not a very efficient process. It only releases approximately 2% of the energy stored in a molecule of glucose, which translates into about 2 ATP molecules produced for every glucose molecule metabolized. Fortunately, cellular respiration provides a much more efficient way of using the energy stored in the glucose. But as a distance runner's gasping for air suggests, the process of cellular respiration is highly dependent on the availability of oxygen. Cellular respiration converts approximately 37% of the energy stored in a glucose molecule into immediately usable energy in the form of between 36 and 38 ATP molecules. While this does not sound like a tremendous figure, it is more efficient than either automobile or jet engines are at converting their respective fuels into usable energy. Most cells can metabolize a variety of organic molecules other than glucose for energy, including more complex carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. But in this program, for a number of reasons, we will focus specifically on how cells convert glucose into energy. First, the cells of most multicellular organisms at some time or another burn or metabolize glucose and convert it into energy. And many types of cells, such as the nerve cells of the human brain, burn glucose nearly exclusively. Secondly, when organic molecules other than glucose are used in cellular respiration, they are usually broken down and converted into glucose or similar molecules before undergoing the process of cellular respiration. Finally, it is useful to visualize cellular respiration as a set of reactions that reverse the reactions involved in photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is usually explained in terms of synthesizing glucose molecules from carbon dioxide and water molecules in a process powered by light energy, even though other carbohydrates can be synthesized via photosynthesis.
So, when we make ATP, the creation of it and the breakdown of ATP is reversible. So for the most part, we start with a molecule called the adenosine diphosphate. And you can see it has a sugar here, it has that adenine, and then of course it has 2 phosphate molecules. So whether we're doing cellular metabolism or substrate level phosphorylation, what happens is a phosphate comes in here and it gets added. And so this is what we make ATP, and we have this molecule because it's much like if you were going to go out into the world. It's really hard if I'm going to go to McDonald's or basically Chick-fil-A or any of those places or gas station and have a $100 bill or my paycheck. They're going to look at me like I'm crazy. They're not going to want to take it. Or if I go here in my office and at the end of the hall I have a machine that allows me to get treats. If I go and try to put a $50 bill in that snack machine, that Coke machine, it's not going to treat it accordingly. So we need to have a functional bill, a 1 or 5 or 10. So the creation of ATP is much like taking glucose or these other big entities that are like your paycheck or like a $100 bill, and then breaking it down into smaller components so that your body can use it and not have to waste a lot of it, right? And so ATP is that component. And basically what happens is that all that energy that we're going to talk about is stored within that bond when we go and kind of break it, and then it releases it when the chemical reactions at the end of the molecule are stabilized. So you go back and forth. So you're not making ATP from scratch. You make your body weight in ATP every day. So it would take way too much material and time and energy to do that. So you basically circle back and forth between these two molecules. Now we do it and make ATP through cellular metabolism through a set of what's called oxidative reduction reactions. And these are important chemical reactions that are part of cellular respiration, and they're needed to release energy from molecules so it can be converted into usable energy. And so basically this whole part of oxidation reduction follows or satisfies the law of conservation of energy. And so the law of conservation of energy is that basically that energy is conserved, that it's not destroyed, just gets transferred into one form to the next, right? So the universe has a certain amount of set of energy. And so what our body is it just taking stuff in. It's not creating energy out of anywhere. It's taking that Snicker bar, taking the energy from the Snicker bar to basically allow our body to function. And so this is the general reaction mechanism for cellular metabolism. It starts here, that's glucose, plus 6 oxygens go to 6 carbon dioxide, 6 waters, and ATP. And so you know that this is amazing because of 666, right? We all know what that is. And that kind of gives most of people's idea what they feel about cellular respiration. And it was mine as well until I did about 5 years of study in just oxidative phosphorylation, or more so the electron transport chain, which is the reason why I love nutrition and these sections, because it basically goes over everything, a lot of what my research was in grad school. And so oxidation, I like to say Leo, the way I remember it, remember, Leo is the name of our lion here, says grr. Loss of electrons is oxidation. Gain of electrons is reduction. And you can follow this by following the hydrogens. And so if you look here, you have C6H12O6. And then this guy gets oxidized to carbon dioxide, which do you see how it's just C and O2? Which means we lost the H here. So this is an example of an oxidation reaction. If you look here, you have the oxygen, and basically this oxygen gets reduced into water. And so if you notice, there's no hydrogens here, but we add them here. So that's a reduction reaction. And basically we see these all through cellular metabolism. And so at this point, I'm going to stop at this slide and give you a break, and we will start with the next one.